My name is Omar al-Jadiri, or at least that was the name I used to carry. Today, I am 24 years old, and I live hidden in the mountains of northern Yemen, fleeing from people who still want to destroy me. But let me take you back to the beginning, when my heart knew no forgiveness, only anger, and my hands only knew how to squeeze tightly. I was born in Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, in a humble house made of mud bricks that my grandfather built himself, brick by brick. In the center was a small courtyard, surrounded by cramped rooms where the scent of cardamom and cinnamon mingled with the smoke of the incense my mother lit every morning. It was a place full of life, you know. My little sister Amira ran barefoot across the smooth stone floor, laughing in that carefree way only children laugh. My father, Ahmed, worked as a merchant in the city market. The mornings in that house, man, I remember them like it was yesterday. The sun streamed through the arched windows and illuminated the designs carved into the wood, geometric patterns that my grandfather must have taken days to make. My mother, Fatima, would wake us up, singing softly those old Yemeni melodies. The smell of warm bread would fill the whole house. It seemed like nothing bad could happen there. Every Friday, my father would take me with him to the market. He would hold my hand, those large, rough hands of someone who works with their own hands, as we walked among the colorful stalls. The vendors shouted their prices. The fabrics danced in the desert wind, and freshly roasted Yemeni coffee perfumed the air. "My son," he would say in that deep, loving voice, "this is our heritage. Never forget it. Always take care of it." Then came the war, and it came like a hurricane that destroys everything without warning. The conflict had been slowly building, but in 2014, when I was 13, it finally exploded. The Houthis took Sana'a, and the streets I knew like the back of my hand became battlefields. The sound of explosions replaced my mother's songs. It was a morning in March 2015. The sky was still purple, that purple color you get before sunrise. Suddenly, the planes of the Arab coalition began to fly over our neighborhood. The noise was unbearable. It felt like the sky was tearing apart. We ran to the basement and stayed there, huddled together, trembling with each explosion that shook the house. First came that sharp whistle, then the bang. The whole world trembled. The roof collapsed. Everything went dark. When I woke up, my ears were ringing so loudly I could barely hear anything. My mouth tasted like iron, blood mixed with dust. I started crawling through the rubble, screaming their names. "Dad! Mom! Amira!" But no one answered. There was only silence. I found my father first. His eyes were open, staring at what remained of the sky. That face that always smiled at me was frozen in an expression of shock. The hands that had held mine in the market were still, covered in dust and blood, amidst the broken bricks. My mother was a few meters ahead. She had thrown herself on top of Amira, trying to protect my little sister until her last second of life. I sat there, amidst the wreckage of my home, of my entire life, and screamed until I had no voice left, until I couldn't make any sound at all. The neighbors who survived found me 3 days later. I was weak, delirious, still clinging to a piece of my mother's dress. I couldn't let go. In the blink of an eye, I lost everything. My family, my home, my childhood, everything. The months that followed, man, I barely remember them. Everything was confusing. I was living in a displaced persons camp near Sana'a, sleeping on torn blankets inside a shack I shared with other families, who had also lost everything. The pain I felt turned into something else. It turned into anger, an anger that grew inside me, that filled every empty space in my chest, that fed on every tear I could no longer cry. That's where they found me. Men with long beards and piercing gazes spoke of revenge, of justice. One afternoon, when the sun turned the camp into an oven, they approached me. Their white robes billowed in the hot wind like flags. "Brother Omar," said one of them, a tall man named Abu Yusuf, who had a voice that commanded your attention. "We see your pain. We know they stole everything from you, but there is a way to transform that pain into purpose, that anger into strength." His words fell upon my parched heart like water on cracked earth. They spoke of those responsible for the destruction, of the enemies of the faith who deserved to pay, of the glory that awaited those who fought for the right cause. And I, lost and desperate as I was, believed every word. It seemed like salvation. That's how my downfall began. Men who took my pain and turned it into a weapon, who took my faith and turned it into an excuse for hatred. They took me to a camp in the mountains of Miriam, a dry place where the night wind cut the skin like a knife and the daytime sun burned mercilessly. It was like an improvised fortress carved into the rocks, hidden from the drones and satellites that watched the sky like metal vultures. There, among men who came from all corners of the Arab world, my transformation began. From a suffering orphan boy to an instrument of war. Training began before sunrise. Abu Yusuf would wake me up with kicks to the ribs, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. "Sleep is for the weak," he growled as I sat up, my body aching. A martyr doesn't need comfort. We ran for miles along rocky trails that tore at the soles of our bare feet. We carried heavy stones in old backpacks until our shoulders screamed in pain and our legs trembled like a leaf. But the physical pain was nothing compared to what they did to our minds. At night, we would sit in a circle around the campfires. The flames cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. The leaders would tell stories of glory, of warriors who gave their lives for the cause. They painted vivid images of eternal paradises, with rivers of honey and endless rewards. "Your family is waiting for you on the other side," Abu Yusuf whispered to me, as the fire made his bearded face look different every second. "Your father, your mother, your little sister Amira, they are all there, waiting for you to join them in eternal glory. But first, you need to fulfill your purpose here." His words took root in my mind like poisonous weeds, establishing themselves in the fertile soil of my pain. I began having visions during the nights. I saw Amira running towards me with open arms. I saw my mother smiling in that warm way I remembered from mornings in our destroyed house. I saw my father waving proudly as I walked towards them. The months passed in a blur of heavy training and constant brainwashing. I learned to assemble and disassemble weapons with my eyes closed, my fingers memorizing each piece like a musician memorizing notes. I studied where to attack to take someone down quickly, how to enter enemy territory unseen. But the worst part wasn't the physical training. It was what was happening inside me. I was taught to see the world in black and white, believers and non-believers, pure and impure, righteous and damned. All shades of gray disappeared from my vision. Violence became purification. Sacrifice became victory. And I swallowed it all. My first mission took place 6 months after I arrived at the camp. "It's something small," they said. "Just a test to see if you're really committed." The plan was simple. I had to enter a market in Sana'a and plant a bomb near a stall where government soldiers bought food. The explosion would take place at lunchtime, when there were more people around. I remember every detail of that day. The weight of the bomb hidden beneath my tunic, the cold sweat running down my back as I walked among innocent people, my heart pounding so fast it felt like everyone could hear it. I saw familiar faces in the crowd, merchants I'd known since childhood, children running between the stalls with that same joy that Amira had. But I did it anyway. The device worked exactly as planned. When the screams began to echo, I felt a strange mixture of horror and satisfaction. Abu Yusuf greeted me with a smile full of pride when I returned to camp that night. "You've taken the first step toward glory," he said, placing his heavy hand on my shoulder. "Now you're ready for bigger missions." And more missions came. Sabotage, attacks on government facilities, high-risk operations. With each action, I felt a piece of my humanity slip through my fingers, disappearing in the hot desert wind. The boy who wept amidst the rubble of his own home had died. In his place, someone hardened by doctrine and a thirst for revenge remained. But it was during a night attack on a military post that everything changed. We were entering silently when a grenade exploded, illuminating the darkness like a false sun. In that blinding light, I saw the face of a young soldier, no older than me. His eyes were filled with the same fear I felt when my house collapsed. In that second, something broke inside me, a small crack in the armor of hatred I had built, and that crack grew in the following weeks. Amidst prayers and training, I began to question myself. It bothered me to see the smug smiles of my teammates when news of new successful operations arrived. A strange unease began to consume me. It bothered me to hear the celebrations when innocent people died, treated as inevitable collateral damage. Abu Yusuf noticed the change in me. His eyes began to study me more closely, searching for signs of weakness. "Omar," he told me one night as we walked under the moonlight, "I see clouds in your heart. Doubt is the enemy of faith. You need a mission to remember why you are fighting." That's when they gave me a task that would change everything. The target was an elderly Christian woman who lived alone in a neighborhood of Sana'a. They said she shared her faith with young people and that this was dangerous. "She is a threat," Abu Yusuf said disdainfully. "You need to eliminate this influence. Send a message." The plan was straightforward. Enter her house, plant the bomb, leave before the explosion. A symbolic impact. For 3 weeks, I prepared every detail. Abu Yusuf showed me maps, patrol schedules, old photos. Her name was Miriam Yusuf, 72 years old, a widow for 5 years, known in the neighborhood for counseling young people seeking spiritual solace. In the photos, she looked small, gray hair, deep wrinkles around her eyes, but with a gentle gaze. She walked with a carved wooden cane, wore simple clothes. She seemed completely harmless, like any old grandma baking bread for her grandchildren. But Abu Yusuf insisted, "Don't be fooled. The enemy disguises himself as a lamb. This woman has sown doubts for years." The bomb was small, compact, designed to cause maximum damage in an enclosed space. They taught me how to activate it and how to hide it in an ordinary backpack. I spent those weeks studying Miriam's routine. I knew she woke up early to pray, that she bought fresh vegetables at the market twice a week, that she received visitors every Wednesday afternoon. I knew every window in that house, every door, every corner of her garden. The house was modest, 2 stories high, made with those typical adobe bricks of Sana'a. A small garden of jasmine and roses in front perfumed the air with an almost painful sweetness. The entrance had a pretty arch, and the blue wooden windows were worn by time. The night before the mission, I couldn't sleep a wink. I stared at the stars through a crack in the roof. They seemed to shine less brightly, as if they knew what was about to happen. A strange feeling came over me, hard to explain. At dawn, Abu Yusuf appeared. "Today you write your name in history," he said, placing his hands on my shoulders. "Your family awaits you in paradise. Don't make them wait any longer." I dressed simply. A white tunic, old sandals, a turban covering part of my face. My backpack, containing the device, was full of books and notebooks to make it look like I was a student. The journey to Sana'a was long. Dusty roads, mountains. I traveled in the back of a truck, hidden among sacks of rice and boxes of food. I arrived in the neighborhood as the sun began to warm the stones. The vendors were setting up their stalls. Children ran among the people. The smell of fresh bread was in the air. I watched from a distance for hours. Miriam left at 9:30, walking slowly with her cane. She greeted everyone with a serenity that surprised me. The shopkeepers greeted her with broad smiles. Children ran towards her to get candy. Even stray dogs approached seeking affection. She returned home at noon carrying fresh vegetables and flowers from the market. I was watching from a rooftop, waiting for the right moment. The plan was simple. Approach pretending to be a lost student, enter the house, leave the device, and leave before anyone noticed. But as I gazed at that house, with its flowery garden and open windows letting the scent of tea waft out, something began to bother me. It was as if my heart was battling what my head had accepted. At 4 in the afternoon, I climbed down from the roof and walked towards the house. Each step seemed heavier than the last. The backpack felt like it weighed tons, as if it carried not just a bomb, but the weight of my entire destiny. When I reached the blue door, my hand trembled as I knocked on the bronze knocker. The sound echoed inside the quiet house. The scent of jasmine filled my nostrils, an absurd contrast to what I was carrying hidden. I heard slow footsteps and the sound of a cane hitting the floor. The door opened, and there she was, smaller than I imagined. Her hazel eyes were full of a tenderness that disarmed me instantly. "Hello, young man," she said in a sweet, calm voice. She smiled, and the wrinkles deepened like a map of lived wisdom. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I replied, trying to control the tremor in my voice. "I'm a university student and I'm lost looking for the library. Could you give me some directions?" It was the story we had rehearsed, but there, in front of her, it sounded like a lie, not only to her, but to me as well. Miriam looked at me intently, tilting her head. "The library is far from here, my son. You must be tired of walking in this sun. Why don't you come in for some tea before continuing your journey?" The invitation took me completely by surprise. In training, we had anticipated resistance, distrust, the need to force entry or use aggressive tricks. But there was that woman, who they said was my enemy, opening her home to me as if I were a beloved grandson. "I don't want to bother you," I murmured. Although my response was automatic, I needed to get inside the house to complete the mission. And that's exactly what she was offering me. "No trouble at all," she insisted with a smile that lit up her whole face. "On the contrary, it's a pleasure to have company. It's been a long time since I've had a visit from a young student." She gestured for me to follow her inside. The house was simple, but cozy. Adobe walls decorated with hand-painted geometric patterns. The floor covered with worn but beautiful Persian rugs. The air held the scent of cinnamon, cardamom, and something else I couldn't quite identify, a fragrance that seemed to embody peace. The main room had colorful cushions arranged around a low, dark wood table. The windows were open, letting the afternoon breeze gently sway the white cotton curtains. Arabic calligraphy adorned the walls, but when I looked closer, I realized they weren't verses from the Quran as I had thought. "Please sit down," she said, gesturing to the most comfortable cushions. "I'll make some fresh tea. I just got some wonderful herbs at the market this morning." As she disappeared into what must have been the kitchen, I took the opportunity to observe the space, searching for the ideal location for the device. The main structure of the house seemed to be in a corner to the east, where there was a thick column that went from floor to ceiling. Placing the pump there would guarantee complete collapse. But while I was doing this tactical calculation, something else caught my attention. On a small table near the window, there was a collection of books I hadn't expected. Among them I recognized a Bible, the Christian Gospel, along with other texts that were clearly not Islamic. The proof of her missionary activity was there, confirming everything Abu Yusuf had said. But there was something else on that table that deeply disturbed me. Photos of smiling children, handwritten letters in beautiful handwriting, small drawings, obviously made by children. In one of the drawings, you could see the figure of an older lady surrounded by children, all with wide smiles drawn with colored crayons. Miriam returned carrying a silver tray with a traditional tea set, small cups with gold details, a steaming teapot, and a plate of sweets that looked homemade. The aroma emanating from the teapot was incredible, a mixture of fresh mint, strong black tea, and spices that brought back memories of my childhood, of afternoons when my mother prepared special teas for important guests. "Here you go," she said, pouring the golden tea into one of the cups. The liquid cascaded down in a fragrant stream. "Drink slowly. It's nice and hot." She sat down in front of me with a grace that belied her age. Her movements were fluid, despite the cane beside her. She picked up her own cup with her wrinkled hands, which I noticed were stained with what looked like drops of colored ink. "Tell me, my son," she began after taking a small sip. "What are you studying at university? Your eyes have that look of someone searching for important answers." The question bothered me. The way she looked at me was too penetrating, as if she could see through the mask I had built. "I study history," I improvised, choosing a topic that would allow me to keep the conversation on neutral ground. "Ah, history," she repeated with genuine interest. "A fascinating subject. The past has so much to teach us about the present, don't you think? And especially here in Yemen, where stories accumulate like layers of sand in the desert." I silently took a sip of tea, aware that every passing minute was time lost to the mission. I needed to find a way out of there, put the device in the right place, and activate the timer. But there was something about that woman's presence that prevented me from reaching the backpack. "I see a lot of pain in your eyes, young Omar," she said suddenly. The fact that she used my real name made me spill tea on my clothes. "What?" I started to say, but she gently raised her hand to silence me. "The eyes don't lie," she replied, with a deep sadness in her voice. "I've seen that same expression on so many young faces during these war years. The pain of those who have lost everything, the anger born of suffering, the despair disguised as purpose." My heart started racing. Did she know who I really was? Was it a trap? My hand instinctively went towards the strap of my backpack, but her next words froze me. "I also lost everything once," she continued. Her voice was almost a whisper, seeming to come from a very deep place in her soul. "My husband, my 2 sons, my granddaughter, all of them in a single night, when a bomb fell on our shelter in the early days of the war." She paused to wipe away a tear that had welled up in the corner of her eye. And in that moment, I saw something I didn't expect. I recognized my own pain reflected in her face. "Rage almost consumed me," she admitted, setting her teacup down on the table, her hands trembling slightly. "I wanted someone to pay for the suffering. I wanted the whole world to feel the pain I carried. I was about to do terrible things, my son. Things that would have dishonored the memory of those I loved." "What stopped her?" I asked before I could control myself. My voice came out hoarse from an emotion I hadn't expected to feel. Miriam smiled with a beautiful sadness that completely transformed her face. "Jesus found me in my darkest moment. He showed me that love is more powerful than hate, that hope can bloom even in the most arid desert of the human soul." Her words hit me like a punch. They were like rays of light piercing the darkness that had enveloped my heart for years. I had never heard anyone speak of Jesus in that way. Not as a distant prophet mentioned in ancient texts, but as someone alive, present, real. "But you Christians are unfaithful," I murmured, repeating the words that had been crammed into my head during months of indoctrination. "You corrupt the true faith." Miriam looked at me with such compassion that I felt as if my soul was being seen for the first time in years. "My son, the only infidel is the hatred that divides God's children. Jesus came for all of us, Arabs and non-Arabs, Muslims and Christians. He is the Prince of Peace who can heal any wound." She stood up slowly, leaning on her cane, and walked to the table where I had seen the books. She picked up a small one with a worn cover and returned to sit closer to me. "Can I read something?" she asked with a gentleness that contrasted brutally with the violence I had hidden in my backpack. Without waiting for my answer, she opened the book to a marked page and began to read, her voice trembling with emotion. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." The words echoed in the silence of that room like celestial music. Something broke inside my chest, a crack that spread through all the hatred I had accumulated. For the first time since the night I lost my family, I felt a peace that didn't come from a promise of revenge, but from something completely different. "Tired?" I repeated, my voice almost a whisper. "Yes, I'm very tired." Miriam closed the book and placed her wrinkled hand on mine. The touch was warm, comforting, just like I remembered my mother on those golden mornings of lost childhood. "Jesus sees your weariness, Omar. He sees the weight you carry, not just in that backpack, but in your heart. He wants to carry it for you." At that moment, everything stopped. Time seemed to freeze as Abu Yusuf's words echoed in my mind like a distant sound. "Eliminate this threat. Send a message." But looking into Miriam's compassionate eyes, seeing that smile that radiated a light I hadn't known since childhood, I realized that the real threat wasn't that sweet lady who opened her home to a stranger. The real threat was the hatred they had planted in my heart. My hands trembled as I slowly reached for the strap of my backpack. Miriam watched me fearlessly, though she had certainly noticed something shifting in the atmosphere of the room. With clumsy movements, I removed the explosive device and placed it on the table between us. "I came here to kill you," I confessed. The words oozed like pus from an open wound. "That device was going to destroy your entire house. I came on a mission." Miriam looked at the explosive without showing surprise or terror. Her expression remained calm, full of the same compassion she had shown since the moment she opened the door. "I know, my son," she said gently. "I knew from the moment you knocked on my door, but I also knew that Jesus sent you to me, not to destroy me, but to heal you." "How can you say that?" I exclaimed. Confusion and pain overwhelmed me like a storm. "I'm a bad person. I've done terrible things. I'm an old woman who lost her entire family," she replied, with an almost supernatural calm. "We are all sinners who need grace, Omar. But Jesus didn't come for the righteous. He came for the lost, for the wounded, for those who carry burdens too heavy for their own shoulders." She stood up again and walked to a window overlooking the garden. The setting sun cast a golden halo around her frail figure as she spoke. "3 nights ago, I had a dream," she said without turning to look at me. "I saw a young man with eyes full of pain coming to my door carrying death in his hands. But I also saw Jesus walking beside him, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal himself. I woke up knowing that I should wait, that I should be ready for the encounter that God had prepared. Her words pierced me like blades of light. Everything I had believed in for the past few years began to crumble. Could there be a God who knows my pain so intimately? A God who doesn't demand vengeance, but offers healing? I don't understand, I whispered, tears beginning to stream down my face for the first time since the night I found my family's bodies. I've lost everything. I've done unforgivable things. How can there be hope for someone like me? Miriam returned and knelt in front of me, holding my hands with a tenderness that painfully reminded me of my mother. Because Jesus is an expert at transforming broken hearts into instruments of peace, she said with a conviction that made the air between us vibrate. He took the pieces of my shattered life and transformed them into something beautiful. He can do the same for you. At that moment, I felt a presence in the room that I couldn't explain with words. It was as if the walls had become transparent and a warm light began to fill every corner. My heart, which had been closed and hardened for so long, began to open like a flower, seeing the sun for the first time. "What do I have to do?" I asked in a voice I didn't recognize as my own, a voice full of vulnerability and a hope I thought I had lost forever. "Just give it all to him," Miriam replied, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "Your pain, your anger, your guilt, your future. Jesus is waiting to take it all and give you a new life." I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I prayed, not for revenge or glory, but for forgiveness and peace. "Jesus," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "If you can truly heal broken hearts like mine, I surrender everything I am to you. Take my life and make it new." At that moment, something extraordinary happened. I felt as if an immense weight had been lifted from my shoulders, as if invisible chains had been broken around my heart. The darkness that had filled my soul for years began to dissipate, replaced by a light that didn't come from the windows, but from somewhere much deeper. I opened my eyes and saw Miriam smiling through her tears. Her hands were still holding mine. "Welcome to the family, Brother Omar," she said with a joy that lit up the entire room. "Jesus has just made you a new creature." And at that moment I knew, with a certainty that transcended all logic, that my life had changed forever. The soldier of shadows had died in that humble house, and in his place, something completely new had been born, a child of light. The transformation was immediate and absolute, like waking up from a nightmare that lasted years and finding myself in a completely different world. But the reality of my situation began to weigh on me as Miriam and I sat in the sacred silence that followed my prayer. The explosive device on the table was a concrete reminder of the life I had just left behind, but also of the dangers I now faced. "I can't go back," I murmured, the magnitude of my decision crashing down on me like a mountain. "When I fail the mission, they will come after me. Abu Yusuf does not forgive betrayal." Miriam nodded, with an understanding that only comes from someone who has lived through decades of war. "I know, my son, but Jesus didn't bring you this far to abandon you now. He will prepare a way, even when it seems impossible." She rose with her usual quiet grace and walked to a bookshelf where she kept several books. She picked up one that looked like an old telephone directory and began to leaf through it with steady fingers. "There are people who can help you," she said, as she dialed a number on an old phone that was on a small table. "Christians who have dedicated their lives to helping those seeking refuge and a new life." While she spoke softly on the phone, I stared at the device I had brought to destroy everything that now represented hope in my life. With trembling hands, I began to carefully dismantle it, disconnecting the wires that would transform that peaceful house into a tomb. Each piece I removed felt like another step further away from the darkness. "Everything's fine," Miriam said after hanging up. "A brother will come pick you up tonight. He has experience helping people in situations like yours. He'll take you to a safe place where you can start your new life." "Why is he doing this for me?" I asked, still trying to grasp the extent of that compassion. "After everything I've done, after what I came to do with you." "Because that's how Jesus' love works," she replied with a smile that seemed to contain all the wisdom in the world. "When he transforms us into instruments of his love for others. You came here as my enemy, but Jesus made you my brother." The hours that followed were the strangest of my life. For the first time in years, I had no mission to accomplish, no orders to follow, no rigid schedule to maintain. Instead, Miriam taught me to pray in a completely new way, not with rehearsed rituals, but with an open heart, speaking to Jesus as one speaks to a close friend. She showed me passages from the Bible that spoke of transformation and hope. We read together about Saul of Tarsus, who persecuted Christians before becoming the Apostle Paul, one of the greatest evangelists in history. His words in 2 Corinthians resonated in my soul like heavenly music. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come, the old has gone, the new is here. This is who you are now, Omar, she told me as she closed the Bible. A new creature. Your past doesn't define your future. Jesus erased everything you were and gave you a completely new identity. As night fell, a soft knock on the door announced the arrival of my rescue. He was a middle-aged man named Yusuf. Curiously, the same name as my former commander, but with a gentleness in his gaze that contrasted sharply with Abu Yusuf's harshness. "Brother Omar," he greeted me with a warm smile. "Miriam told me about her encounter with Jesus. What a joy to see how the Lord continues to transform lives." The plan was simple, but dangerous. Yusuf was going to take me in his pickup truck to the northern mountains, where there was a clandestine network of Christians who helped refugees and converts in need of protection. It would be an 8-hour drive on poorly patrolled roads, traveling only at night to reduce the risk of being discovered. "You need to understand," Yusuf explained, while reviewing the maps spread out on Miriam's table, "that once we leave Sana'a, there's no going back. The brothers in the mountains will welcome you, but you'll have to start a completely new life. New name, new story, new identity." The idea of completely abandoning my past was both terrifying and liberating. Omar al-Jadiri, the young man who lost his family and became an instrument of revenge, was going to die that night. In his place, someone new would be born. Someone whose life would be defined not by hatred, but by the love of Jesus. Miriam packed a small backpack with provisions for the trip: water, bread, dried fruit, and an Arabic Bible that had belonged to her deceased husband. "So you never forget who you are now," she said, placing it in my hands with reverence. Shortly before leaving, I knelt before that extraordinary woman who risked her own life to save mine. "How can I repay you for what you've done?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "Live," she replied simply, placing her hands on my head in a blessing that I felt in my soul. "Live the life that Jesus gave you. Love the way he loved you. That will be all the gratitude I need." The drive up into the mountains was tense, but peaceful. Yusuf proved to be not only a skilled driver, but also a wise brother who shared stories of other converts he had helped over the years. Each testimony he shared strengthened my newfound faith and helped me understand that I wasn't alone on this journey. "The persecuted church is the strongest church," he told me, as we drove along winding roads lit only by moonlight. "When you have to risk everything for your faith, each day becomes a conscious decision to follow Jesus. This generates an intimacy with him that many Christians in free countries never experience." We arrived in the mountain village of Al-Mahit as dawn began to paint the sky pink and gold. It was a remote place, isolated from the world by rugged peaks and deep valleys, perfect for those who needed to stay off the radar of authorities and extremist groups. The house that would become my new home was modest, built on a hillside with spectacular views of the surrounding valleys. I was welcomed by a Christian family, Abu Marcus, his wife Miriam, and their 3 children, who received me not as a stranger, but as a long-lost relative who had finally found his way home. "Welcome, brother," Abu Marcus told me with tears in his eyes. "Jesus prepared us for your arrival. We were praying for you even before we knew you existed." The first few days in my new refuge were a period of intense adjustment. I had to learn to live without the rigid structure and singular purpose that had defined my existence for years. I no longer had daily training sessions, missions to plan, or enemies to fight. Instead, there was silence, peace, and the opportunity to rediscover who I truly was when I wasn't defined by violence. Abu Marcus became my spiritual mentor, teaching me the fundamentals of the Christian faith with a patience that reminded me of Miriam's. We spent hours every day reading the Bible together, exploring the teachings of Jesus, which contrasted sharply with the doctrine of hatred that had consumed years of my life. "The kingdom of Jesus is different from any earthly kingdom," he explained to me one morning as we watched the sunrise from the house's terrace. "It is not built with swords, but with love. It is not maintained with fear, but with grace. It does not expand with conquests, but with service. Miriam taught me practical skills for my new life: how to cultivate a small garden, how to repair farming tools, how to cook traditional mountain dishes. But more importantly, she showed me how to live in a Christian community, where everyone cares for each other's needs as if they were blood relatives. Their children, who were initially shy around me, soon adopted me as their older brother. They taught me games I had forgotten from my own childhood. They told me stories of adventures in the mountains, and without me realizing it, they helped me rediscover the simple joy of being young, without the burden of deadly missions. But the threat from my past never completely disappeared. Yusuf visited me every few weeks with news from the outside world, and the news wasn't good. Abu Yusuf and his cell were actively searching for me. They had put a price on my head and sent search teams all over Yemen. "They've identified your approximate location," Yusuf informed me during one of the visits, his expression grave. "They know you're in the northern region, but the mountains are vast, and the brothers here have developed communication networks that allow them to keep you one step ahead of any search." The news was terrifying, but it also strengthened my resolve. I had found something worth living for, a family that loved me unconditionally, and a purpose that built instead of tearing. It didn't matter how many enemies I had in the past. My future belonged to Jesus. It was during this period of refuge and growth that I began to truly understand what it meant to be persecuted for my faith. Each day I lived as a Christian in a region where it could cost me my life was a declaration that Jesus was worth more than my personal safety. And curiously, this pursuit didn't fill me with fear, but with a profound joy. For the first time in my life, I was suffering not for my own sins or for empty revenge, but for something pure and eternal. As Yusuf had said, the persecuted church was truly the strongest church. The months spent in the mountains of Al-Mawit became the most transformative of my life. Each sunrise I witnessed from the stone terrace of Abu Marcus marked not just a new day, but a new opportunity to grow in my newfound faith. The underground Christian community that took me in functioned like a large family, where each member cared for the spiritual and physical well-being of the others with a devotion I had never seen before. My new identity began to solidify little by little. I was no longer Omar al-Jadiri, the soldier of the shadows. Now I was Marwan al-Shamali, a war refugee who had come to the mountains in search of peace and a new life. The forged documents that the brothers obtained for me were impeccable, but more important was the inner transformation that made the outward lie less and less necessary. Abu Marcus involved me in the secret ministry they operated in the house. Every Wednesday night, Christians from neighboring villages would gather in the basement of the house to worship together, study the Bible, and encourage one another amidst the constant persecution they faced. These meetings have become the most precious moments of my week. The first time I attended one of these gatherings, I was moved by the atmosphere of genuine love that filled the underground space. Men and women of all ages sang hymns in low voices, their faces illuminated by candles that cast dancing shadows on the adobe walls. When it came time to share testimonies, I heard stories that broke my heart and strengthened my faith at the same time. "Brothers and sisters," said a woman named Sarah, whose husband had been arrested by the authorities for possessing a Bible. "This week, I saw the hand of Jesus working in powerful ways. Even in prison, Ahmad is using his testimony to touch the hearts of other prisoners. 2 men gave their lives to Christ after seeing how my husband responds to abuse with love and forgiveness." Stories like this repeated themselves every week. Converts risking everything to follow Jesus. Families losing their livelihoods for refusing to deny their faith. Young people facing total rejection from their families for choosing the gospel instead of ancestral traditions. But in each testimony, there was a common thread of joy that transcended external circumstances. "Suffering for Christ is not punishment," Abu Marcus explained to me one evening after a particularly moving encounter. "It is a privilege. When we suffer for his name, we share in his sufferings. And this draws us closer to his heart than any earthly comfort ever could." I began to understand that my own transformation, from terrorist to follower of Christ, was not just a personal story of redemption, but a powerful testimony that God wanted to use to reach others. Abu Marcus encouraged me to share my story with the group, although I initially resisted out of shame and fear. "Your testimony has power precisely because you come from the deepest darkness," he insisted with that characteristic wisdom. "When people see what Jesus can do with a heart completely given over to evil, they better understand the extent of his grace." The first time I told my whole story to my group of siblings, the silence that followed my words was so profound that I could hear my own heart beating. I had shared everything: the loss of my family, my recruitment by extremists, the missions I carried out, and finally, the encounter with Miriam that changed everything. When I finished, an elderly lady named Yusuf approached me with tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "My son," she said, holding my hands in hers, "if Jesus can transform a heart like yours, then there is hope for anyone in this world. Your story is a gift from God to all of us." That night marked a turning point in my ministry. I began secretly traveling to other villages in the mountains, accompanying Abu Marcus, sharing my testimony with groups of Christians who lived in extreme isolation. Each time I told my story, I saw faces light up with renewed hope, fueled by the tangible evidence of Christ's transformative power. But my ministry also increased the risks. During one of these trips to a village called Hajjah, a local informant recognized something familiar in my face and relayed his suspicions to contacts in the capital. The news eventually reached Abu Yusuf, who intensified the search efforts with new details about my approximate location. Yusuf arrived at our house one night with urgent news that made my blood run cold. "Brother Marwan," he said, using my new name, but with an expression that conveyed the gravity of the situation. "We have reliable information that a search team is on its way to that region. We need to transfer you immediately." Abu Marcus and his family received the news with a calmness that only comes after years of living under constant threat. Within hours, they had already packed my few belongings and prepared an escape route that would take me even further into the mountains, to a refuge used for generations to protect persecuted Christians. Saying goodbye broke my heart. That family had given me not only physical shelter, but the experience of belonging to something bigger than myself. The children cried as they hugged me for the last time. Miriam gave me Abu Marcus's Bible with a handwritten dedication on the first page. "So you remember that you're never alone," she told me, her voice choked with emotion. "Jesus goes with you wherever you go." The new refuge was in a natural cave adapted for human habitation, hidden in a cliff that rose thousands of meters above the valley. It was primitive compared to Abu Marcus's house, but it offered absolute safety and spectacular views that constantly reminded me of the greatness of the God who saved me. There I lived with a Christian hermit named Brother Daniel, a man who had spent decades in contemplative solitude after losing his entire family in the early years of the Civil War. His spiritual wisdom was as deep as the valleys that stretched below us, and his knowledge of the scriptures was encyclopedic. "God brought you here not only to protect you," he told me during one of our long nightly conversations as we gazed at the stars from the cave entrance, "but to prepare you for something greater. Your time in this desert will be like the time Jesus spent being tempted, a test that will strengthen you for the ministry he has prepared for you." During the months that followed, my life was reduced to the essentials: prayer, Bible study, contemplation of nature, and manual labor to maintain our shelter. Simplicity was liberating after years of moral and emotional complexity. In the silence of the mountains, I could hear the voice of God with a clarity I had never experienced before. During this period of forced isolation, I began writing my full testimony, documenting every detail of my transformation, from the pages of pain to those of redemption. Brother Daniel encouraged me in this project, insisting that God had specific purposes for preserving my story. "Future generations will need to know that no heart is so hardened that Jesus cannot transform it," he told me as he reviewed my handwritten pages. "Your story will be a seed that will bear fruit in soil you can't even imagine now." It was also during this time that I received news that filled me with joy, mixed with concern. Through the underground Christian communication network, I learned that Miriam had been arrested by the authorities after someone denounced her as a Christian missionary. But even in prison, she continued sharing the love of Jesus with other inmates, and at least 3 women gave their lives to Christ through her testimony. She is reaping what she sowed in her heart. Brother Daniel observed when I shared the news with him. Every life that Jesus touches through her ministry is the fruit of the seed she planted with sacrificial love. The news motivated me to intensify my prayers and my preparation for the day I could return to active ministry. I knew God was preparing me for something specific, although I still couldn't clearly see what form that calling would take. Months later, the answer came unexpectedly. Yusuf arrived at our shelter bringing news that would once again change the course of my life. An international Christian organization had been following my story and wanted to help me leave Yemen to continue my ministry in a country where I could serve openly, without constant danger. "It's an opportunity to reach a much larger audience with your testimony," he explained, as he handed me my travel documents and visa. "But it also means leaving forever the land where you were born and where you found Jesus." This was one of the hardest decisions of my life. Yemen was my home, the place where I had lost everything, but also where I had found everything. But I also recognized that staying there would severely limit the reach of my testimony and keep those who protected me in constant danger. After days of intense prayer and consultation with Brother Daniel, I made the decision that would define the rest of my life. I would accept the opportunity to leave Yemen to expand my ministry, but I would dedicate my life to praying and working for the day when I could return and serve my homeland. Saying goodbye to Brother Daniel was deeply moving. This holy man had been not only my protector, but my spiritual father during the most formative months of my Christian faith. His last words before I left resonated in my heart like a divine mission. "Go, my son, but never forget that you are a son of these mountains and this land. Jesus is sending you as an ambassador of his kingdom, but also as a bearer of Yemen's hope. Wherever you go, take the heart of our nation with you." The journey to freedom was dangerous, but successful. Through clandestine routes that had been used for decades to smuggle persecuted Christians out of the country, I finally arrived at a place where I could breathe without fear, where I could speak openly of the love of Jesus without fearing for my life. But freedom brought its own challenges. For the first time in years, I didn't need to hide, but I also no longer had the clear structure and purpose that had defined my existence for so long. The first few months in my new country were a period of intense adaptation, learning a new language, adjusting to a different culture, finding ways to share my testimony in contexts completely different from those I knew. But God had already prepared the way even before I arrived. The Christian organization that facilitated my escape connected me with churches and ministries that had a heart set on the Arab world, and specifically Yemen. Soon I found myself traveling to different countries, sharing my story at conferences, churches, and events where my testimony touched hearts and opened eyes to the reality of the persecuted church. Every time I told my story, from my childhood in Sana'a to my meeting with Miriam, I saw the same pattern: faces that went from shock to admiration, tears that flowed as I described the transformation Jesus had worked in my heart, and renewed commitments to pray for and support Christians who suffer for their faith in places like Yemen. "Your story proves that no heart is so hardened that God cannot transform it," a brother told me after a conference where I shared my testimony with over 1,000 people. "When people hear how Jesus transformed you, from a terrorist to a Christian, they understand that he can work miracles in anyone's life." But my heart remained connected to Yemen and the people I left behind. I established a specific prayer ministry for my native country, organizing vigils and intercessory events where Christians from all over the world prayed for peace, for the persecuted Yemeni church, and for a spiritual revival that would transform the nation. The news that arrived through clandestine networks was often devastating. The civil war had intensified. The humanitarian situation was steadily worsening, and the persecution of Christians was increasing. But there were also encouraging accounts of secret conversions, of house churches growing despite oppression, and of Yemeni Christians remaining faithful even under threat of death. One of the most moving accounts arrived almost a year after my departure. Miriam had been released from prison after an international pressure campaign, but her health had been severely affected by the prison conditions. But the first thing she did upon her release was to reopen the house to welcome young people who needed hope and guidance. She continued to be the instrument that God used. "To save you," Abu Marcus wrote in one of his coded letters. "And now she's seeing the fruits multiply through your ministry. Every life you touch with your testimony is part of the harvest," she sowed in tears in her living room that afternoon. These words motivated me to intensify my efforts. I began writing a book detailing my entire story. I worked with human rights organizations to document the situation of Christians in Yemen, and I created a fund to support families of persecuted Christians who lost everything because of their faith. But perhaps most significant was the ministry I developed specifically to reach other young Arabs who had been radicalized or were at risk of being radicalized. My story resonated particularly with those who had experienced traumatic losses and been tempted by messages of revenge and violence. "I understand your pain," I would tell them during individual counseling sessions, "because I've been exactly where you are. I thought revenge would bring me peace, that violence would honor my lost family, but I only found emptiness until Jesus showed me a better way." Several young people gave their lives to Christ after hearing my testimony, abandoning paths of radicalization to embrace the transformative love of Jesus. Each conversion was a personal victory that reminded me why God allowed me to experience that darkness so that I could guide others to the light. 3 years after my escape from Yemen, I received the news I had both hoped for and feared. Abu Yusuf had been killed in an airstrike, and the cell that trained me was dismantled. Technically, I was no longer a wanted fugitive, but Yemen was still too dangerous for any self-proclaimed Christian, especially someone with my background. But this news also brought a sense of closure that allowed me to fully focus on the future. God had definitely closed the chapter of my past life to open a completely new one. I was a completely new person. I was no longer Omar al-Jadiri or Marwan al-Shamali. I was simply a child of God, whose life had been radically transformed by my encounter with Jesus. My ministry continued to expand. The book I wrote about my testimony was translated into several languages and reached people all over the world. I received letters from readers who found hope in my story, including several from Yemen who obtained copies through underground networks. One letter in particular touched me deeply. It was a young man from Sana'a who wrote, "Brother, your story saved me from following the same path you did. I was filled with anger after losing my father in the war, and men like those who recruited you approached me. But when I read how Jesus transformed you, I knew there was a better hope. Now I am a secret Christian, and I pray every day for peace in our country." Stories like this constantly reminded me that God was using my testimony in ways that went far beyond what I could see or measure. Each presentation, each book sold, each prayer offered was a seed planted in soil that only God could make bear fruit. Today, as I share these words from my adopted home, my heart remains torn between gratitude for the freedom I have to serve Jesus openly and longing for the day when I can return to Yemen to serve Him there. I know that day may not come during my earthly life, but I trust that God has perfect purposes, even in waiting. My story didn't end with my escape from Yemen or with the success of my international ministry. My true story began in that humble room in Miriam's house, where she healed her supposed enemy and showed me the transformative love of Jesus. Everything that came after is simply the unfolding of that initial transformation. If there's one thing I want to make clear with my testimony, it's this. No matter how deep you have fallen into darkness, no matter how much evil you have caused or how much pain you have experienced, Jesus can completely transform your life. He specializes in taking soldiers of darkness and transforming them into ambassadors of light, in taking hearts full of hatred and transforming them into instruments of love. I was ready to explode and take the life of an innocent, elderly woman. But this woman told me about Jesus, and He gave me a new life. If He could do that for me, He can work miracles for anyone willing to give Him their broken heart. This is the hope I carry with me wherever I go, the truth I share with everyone who listens to me. In Jesus, there is always hope for a new beginning.